I would have to say it was a very mild winter, and I know people have gone through a lot of pain. A lot of founders have really struggled to raise capital. A lot of people have lost their jobs and so on. But compared to what it could have been, it was a sunny, beautiful winter. It barely snowed, and now it's spring. The birds are singing. So I think it's really exciting.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is a Reacts episode. Industry insiders having frank debates about the latest tech, politics, and business news. Whether you're a founder, investor, or operator in a startup, you'll gain insights into how current events connect to broader themes and trends that impact your startup, your investments, and your day-to-day operational decisions. The conversation starts now.
Hey, I'm Chris Saad.
And I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
That's right. You're back again for another Reacts. Yaniv, it's so great to have you while you're on your big European vacation. Welcome back to the Reacts show.
Thanks. It is really good to be here. I'm coming at you from Munich, where I've actually been at Oktoberfest, although not today, luckily. I'm coming at you sober.
I like you better drunk, honestly.
Yeah. My wife tells me that too.
So I noticed you haven't had time to be on Reacts for a couple of weeks, but you've had time to post on LinkedIn and have some viral posts. So yeah, you're still popular on the internet.
Well, there's a funny story about the most recent viral post that I think is still gathering comments and reactions, which is one about, basically I've been seeing a lot of comments or a lot of posts on LinkedIn talking about how founders need to prioritize revenue from day one. And I basically push back on that, as listeners to this show would not be surprised about. So yeah, it's been really interesting. It's generated a bunch of polite pushback, some extremely impolite pushback, and also a lot of people agreeing. And I think, there's a nuance here. I nearly feel like there's another episode in this really about like funding models more broadly. A lot of the misunderstanding between venture-backed versus bootstrapped versus, other forms of funding your company. But anyway, there's actually a funny backstory to this as well, because Chris, like you said, I don't actually have a lot of time to post on LinkedIn either, because I'm prioritizing this time with my family. And one of the things I was doing is actually after listening to our last episode of Reacts that I wasn't on, talking about ChatGPT 01, I was like, I want to just take a little bit of time and play with it and get a feeling of how it works. And so I was mucking around with it. And actually, I'm busy mucking around with it. And my wife asks me, she's like, what are you doing in the other room? And I'm like, oh, I'm just playing with AI. And she's like, can you not do that, please? We're on holiday. Anyway, I'm doing that. I'm like, I wonder if it's gotten any less robotic in its tone. And I said, please write a post basically saying I've been seeing too many of this type of advice to optimize for revenue early and why it's a bad idea for most founders, and to explain why it's a bad idea. And so, yeah, Chris, I'm actually outing myself now as having produced an AI-written post, and it's actually done extremely well. And, I posted it and I nearly deleted it 5 minutes later. And I'm like, oh, let's just let it ride. I posted it on Saturday night. It's a quiet time. And, it's actually gotten a lot of engagement. And first of all, it was a genuine, authentic post in the sense that it was saying what I wanted it to say. I didn't just say, generate a random LinkedIn post for me. But the tone and the quality of the writing and the quality of the argument was actually really impressive. So I just thought it would be fun to share that, the fact that, yes, I've been posting on LinkedIn with the help of AI and, generating really interesting conversations and, just as a sign of how much things have improved here.
Very cool. Yeah, that generally sounds really robotic. And actually, I saw another post by John Cutler, a friend of the pod, who was saying, look at all these dumb AI comments. They're so obviously by AI. Look, I've used AI as a writing partner before to kind of grammar check what I've written or to maybe make it a little bit more emotional or something. But yeah, it's generally not good to write the whole thing. And interesting to hear that it basically wrote the whole thing. Did you tweak it or adjust it at all? Or no, you just posted it wholesale?
Nope, posted it wholesale.
Well, shit. Okay. Well, if you want more AI content, follow Yaniv on LinkedIn.
That's right. I'm your AI content guy. Let's bust into it, Chris. What are we talking about today?
Yeah, that's right. We don't usually do this kind of banner at the start of the show. I like this. So yeah, on today's show, we're going to talk about the Fed rate cut, the interest rate cut from the Federal Reserve. What has it done to the stock market? What's it done to crypto? And what does it mean for founders and operators just like you? We're going to talk about the 23andMe board resignation. Basically, the whole board resigned from 23andMe. We're going to tell you why, what does it mean, and what does it mean for governance, boards, founder shares and control, founder mode, and all that stuff, and how you should adjust the way you run your company as a result. We're also going to talk about the chances of being a unicorn and why it matters to be in Silicon Valley and a YC company. Does it really make a difference? Do the numbers reflect any meaningful change? How can you maximize your probabilities of success? And then finally, we're going to talk about Snap Spectacles, their new AR glasses, which are actually kind of incredible, and they're really not being talked about enough. And then at the very end, there's some breaking news about OpenAI and their new advanced voice mode with the ability to interrupt it and change the way it talks and the way it laughs and all this kind of stuff, which got released just as we were recording the show. So we'll touch on that toward the end as well. All that and a lot more on this week's show. Stay tuned right after the break.
Whether you're starting or scaling your company's security program, demonstrating top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. And it gets even better. Just for TSP listeners, you can get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off. Okay, welcome back. Now, just before we bust into the first topic, I wanted to remind you all of the Startup Podcast Pact. All we ask you in return for the content that we put out is that you like us and follow us in your favorite listening app, follow us on YouTube, and give us a shout out on LinkedIn or wherever it is that you have your audience. It helps us reach new people and allows us to keep on doing what we are doing.
All right, with that, let's jump straight into it. For our first topic this week, we want to talk about the Federal Reserve's latest rate cut, or their first rate cut really after a series of rate hikes over the last couple of years. We all know about the end of ZIRP and the massive impact that's had on valuations and the public markets and by flow on the private markets and VC. They've now started switching gears. They had a few moments where they kind of left rates the same, and now they're moving to the cuts, citing slower economic growth, slowing inflationary pressures, and of course, as predicted by everybody and as obvious, the stock market has popped, crypto's jumped up a little, and people are feeling a little better about themselves, as if this was some miracle that was unexpected. Yaniv, we've talked on the show a number of times about how ZIRP has affected startups, how public market valuations and the price of money affects valuations in the early stage. It's really, really important, and it compresses valuations all the way down the stream. And so this is obviously very good for startups. Is there anything more to the story than that?
I don't know if there's more to the story than that, but I think first of all, it's really exciting news. I'm not like a fiscal policy nerd by any means, but you would have to say that what has been achieved by the Fed, or whatever you want to say, is actually pretty remarkable, which is that we had inflation really going up and it looked pretty scary, and they have managed to bring it back to where they wanted it without going into a recession. And certainly without going into...
Yet.
Yeah. Look, but I guess here's the point. The stock market was close to a record high even before this interest rate cut. So we had a massive ramp up in interest rates from like 0% to whatever it was, like close to 5%, a huge amount of ramp up. And the economy kind of pretty much kept chugging along, cooled a little, which it needed to. That was the whole point of the interest rate rises. But we were in this period of really unnaturally low interest rates for a long period. And what we seem to have done is kind of renormalize them without killing the economy. And now one or two rate cuts, like you said, Chris, people are going to be celebrating it. They're going to feel kind of a bit wealthier again, and it's really good news. And so I think this is kind of the end of the winter, and I would have to say it was a very mild winter. And I know people have gone through a lot of pain. A lot of founders have really struggled to raise capital. A lot of people have lost their jobs and so on. But compared to what it could have been, it was a sunny, beautiful winter. It barely snowed, and now it's spring. The birds are singing. So I think it's really exciting. If you're a startup, if you're a founder and you have seen some traction through the last couple of years of any sort, then this is only going to help. Will there be more rate cuts? I don't know. But increased valuations, people with more money in their pockets, other companies with more budget to spend on stuff, that all starts to unclog the works here. And so, yeah, I don't want to get too far ahead of my skis here, but it is definitely positive news. And I would just feel that just from a sentiment point of view, everyone who's been sitting on the sidelines wondering, that includes VCs, that includes potential customers and so on, is just going to feel that little bit more comfortable to open up their wallet and do the thing. And so it's just really exciting news as far as I'm concerned. I didn't think we would necessarily be here.
Yeah, most decisions lately, it feels like have been kind of no decisions, right? Well, let's wait. Let's see what happens. There's this classic mistake or conflation that occurs, confusing the economy with the stock market. And those are two very, very different things. But yes, the stock market has been strong. And at least in the US, the economy has been relatively strong as well, with unemployment rates being historically low and new jobs being created and so on. I would say in particular on the stock market side, they've benefited a lot, they being the Biden administration in the US, from, I think, the AI surge, right? A lot of those gains have been driven by NVIDIA and Apple and so on. And I mean, again, like you, I'm no expert on these topics, but I'd say the concentration of growth has probably never been higher or hasn't been higher for a long time. And so those Magnificent Seven are really driving a lot of growth, and that's really driven by the AI speculation and hype and investment, a real investment in that future. So yeah, it's good to see both the stock market and the economy, at least by the numbers, doing very well. But I do think there's this underlying softness that isn't somehow revealed by the numbers. I think the broad stock market is not doing quite as well as the Magnificent Seven. And I think the lived experience of the economy is a lot of softness. I saw this meme on Facebook, I think, of these people with their little open for work badges, but they've been replaced with desperate.
Yeah, I saw that.
That was part of a meme of like being open for work is a sign of desperation. It's a bad signal for employers.
Yeah.
And there's a debate about that. And, we don't want to go into that right now. But it is also touching on this other topic of like, some people are not just open for work, they're desperate for work. And the dislodgement is something about, inflation and rates and whatever, but it's also something to do with automation and, and AI and this kind of efficiency kick we've been on, supercharged by Elon's just slashing of Twitter's workforce, and Twitter stays running. That was then buttressed by Brian Chesky's founder mode. So, between Elon firing all the people and Brian Chesky saying fire all the product managers, everyone's like, hey, how can we just fire everybody? And so there is a softness, at least in tech, that I think is real.
Yeah, I think, you just added at least in tech there. Like, that's obviously just one view of the world. There are massive labor shortages in all sorts of sectors that have been there for a long time. But I also just honestly think, Chris, there's this comparison effect. I'm not trying to be unempathetic to the people who are going through real challenges, but I think this is what a normal economy looks like. We had an exceptionally strong economy for a long time, where getting jobs was easy, where getting investments was easy, where getting pay rises was easy. And that led to this overheating and ultimately ZERP. And we've kind of hit reset. But the amazing thing is that we've hit this reset and gone back to a normal economy, not a terrible economy. And now interest rates are being cut. I could easily see us getting a bit more of a pep in our step again and really going back to, having some of that softness go away gradually, which is actually the way economies should grow.
All right. Actually, this is a really nice segue into our second topic, which is the 23andMe board of independent directors just wholesale up and resigned on September 17th. It's always funny to see this kind of announcement on the official site of a company. But here it's like the letter they sent to the company and to the CEO saying, after months of work, we have yet to receive a fully financed, diligenced and actionable proposal that is in the best interests of the non-affiliated shareholders. This is the board speaking. And we believe that the special committee and the board have provided ample time for you to submit such a proposal. So they're looking for the CEO to provide a plan of action, a strategy that they think that they can buy into and they can believe in. They didn't get one for 5 months, according to this letter. And so in corporate speak, although we wholeheartedly support the company's mission, blah, 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 we've decided to leave. And one of the reasons here also is, besides that delay, they cited the concentration of voting power in the CEO's hands. And this is like not a nothing board. This includes Roloff Botha from Sequoia Capital, partner at Sequoia Capital, right? So these guys generally know what they're talking about. Look, from the outside, Yaniv, I don't know what the hell 23andMe is doing. That company sort of had the same product for a very long time and haven't seemed to find a way to turn that into a thin wedge to anything. And there's no real reason for me to have a long-lived relationship, to retest, to connect to other services. They're just aggregating demand with this really interesting test, but they don't seem to be pointing it at any kind of supply besides the DNA test and some ancestry features. So who knows what the hell they're doing, just burning money. And the board is tired of it, and they resigned en masse. This speaks to a whole bunch of topics, board oversight, governance, voting power for the CEO, sort of the reverse of the OpenAI Sam Altman incident where they fired him. So Yaniv, what do you think this signals for 23andMe? What do you think it tells founders about maintaining voting rights? Where the hell do you think 23andMe is going with all this capital and burn rate and very little innovation? What's going on over there?
Yeah, well, I mean, the short answer, I think, is it's just not a very well-run company from the outside. That would seem to be the case. And yeah, there are a few lessons there. First of all, it is worth pointing out that 23andMe's share price is down 96.5% from its IPO, more like 97.5% from its all-time high. So, when you have such a sort of destruction of value, then of course you get a bunch of very angry investors. And so the board's feeling a lot of heat. And yet what seems to be happening is that the company hasn't really defined a good direction, like you said. And, I'm trying to dig back into my memory bank of 23andMe. It was founded by Anne Wojcicki, who is kind of a Silicon Valley royalty. She's the sister of Sue Wojcicki, who actually sadly recently died, but who was basically, she was the person who gave Larry and Sergey of Google the garage and was a senior and very well-respected executive there since the start of Google. And so this was a company that I think got more hype and more excitement around it from investors because of its links to Google, which were unofficial, just to be known. It was a family connection, let's say. And so, it always had this hype about it that was a bit difficult to justify. And again, not a space I've looked into closely, Chris, but I think they just got done in by Ancestry.com. Ancestry.com was this kind of boring thing that was just for old people, trying to figure out who their third cousin twice removed living in Iceland was. And then when this DNA testing technology became effectively a commodity, they had something that 23andMe didn't, which was this huge database and a real use case. If you send your DNA to Ancestry.com, you find out all the people you're related to, and they already have all the tools in place.
So 23andMe does that now?
I'm sure it does, but Ancestry.com dominated that space. So they had the product that really mattered, and then they could basically integrate into having the DNA testing, whereas 23andMe started with the DNA testing and had to build the product. And again, I've not analyzed this industry closely, but from what I can tell, Ancestry.com is slaying. It is, if you have anybody over 50 in your life, they're on Ancestry and they're like, oh, I just found out that, we've got someone who was related to the Holy Roman Empire and, Anyway, the other thing I wanted to just mention here is you asked about dual class shareholders, and it's a shame we don't have Emil on the show today because we've debated this previously, but overall, I'm of the opinion that dual class shareholder structures rather, lead to poor governance, right? And it's all well and good if you have a founder that you believe in and who continues to do the job well, right? And you're like, okay, it can give them the power to do things that publicly traded company with lots of different shareholders, some of their pension funds and whatever might not be able to do, and generate more value. But what is true on the way up is also true on the way down, right? Which is that you have no control over these people. And so what does it mean to own shares in a company that has a dual class shareholder structure? It means your shares are held hostage. You have a very weakened form of ownership. I would argue it barely counts as ownership when you are buying these shares. And so, yeah, I don't think it's good. I think power does corrupt, and we can often be guilty of exceptionalism, right? Where we say, okay, just because dual class shareholder structures have worked for some companies, notably Google and Meta, that they're a good idea to give the founder that much power. But I think in general, it's a bad idea, right? In general, governance is a good thing. And I think it's always dangerous to learn from the exception and say that should be the rule. And I think 23andMe never had the firepower, should never have had the firepower to be able to demand a dual class shareholder structure. And somehow they got away with it. Like I said, I think the family connections were part of it. And now that's coming back and biting everyone in the ass.
Yeah. So, I have two minds about this. I'm a big believer in founders and the founder journey. I'm a big believer in the crucible of creating your own company and pulling some potentiality into reality. I'm a big believer in the ability to move fast and break things, to coin a phrase, founder mode. But you're right. It is optimizing for exceptional people who can do exceptional things. And so by definition, it is the exception. But boy, are those exceptions exciting, right? And boy, are those exceptions valuable both to the shareholders, but also to society. And boy, is the opposite often a recipe for meddling incrementalism. Like shareholders who are obsessed with the next quarter instead of the next wave and the next great achievement. There are absolutely pros and cons for these two models, and absolutely founder mode and concentrated governance power in the hands of a few or a founder only works in exceptional circumstances. But I'm most interested in the exceptional circumstances. And this is a good example of a failure state. It's really quite disheartening and disappointing. There's a lot more potential, I think, for this company than they've managed to wring out of it. With the billions of dollars spent and the creativity, I'm sure, that's within the walls of that company, it doesn't seem to have laddered up to much new net value over time.
Yeah. So, okay, TLDR, we went on a rant, but poorly managed company is poorly managed. dual class shareholder prevents anything from being done about that. The end. I think that's really the story here.
The end. And be careful about the founder you bet on.
Well, yeah.
And the journey you're going on.
Over 7,000 global companies like Atlassian, Dovetail, FlowHealth, and Quora all use Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. Why aren't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.
So the next topic we wanted to talk about is a really controversial one. We talk often on this show, and really our mission on the show is to democratize Silicon Valley thinking and mindset and principles globally. And I would say there is a tension between the idea of, do you need to move to Silicon Valley in order to maximize your potential for success and to take advantage of this mindset? Or can you do it from where you're based? And I think probably between us, Yaniv, I'm a little bit more bullish or maybe even a little bit more dogmatic on the idea that if you want to build a blockbuster company, chances are, especially if it's a platform company, a tech company, chances are you want to move to Silicon Valley. It is one of the major predictors and accelerators and improvers of the probabilities of your success. Maybe just to speak for you a little bit, I think you agree that it might improve your chances or it might be a beneficial thing, but it's not mandatory. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think Silicon Valley is a real thing, right? It is, I've said it before, Silicon Valley is a place. It's not just a state of mind. I think you can have the state of mind and it is somewhat portable, but if you leave Silicon Valley, the place, you have still lost something really meaningful that can help accelerate your startup.
Yeah. And so for my money, startups are all about probabilities and maximizing your probabilities. And I really think Silicon Valley is one of those massive maximizers of probabilities. But, these are all anecdotal. These are feelings. These are senses we've talked about on the show many times. And sometimes, there's an opportunity to quantify this. And Gary Tan over at YC, he runs YC. He's a very successful podcaster in his own right and been a successful founder in his own right. He tweeted recently, the odds of being a unicorn at YC, Y Combinator, if you don't know, and I don't know why you don't, it's the number one accelerator in the world, really sort of defined what that model is. He says that the odds of becoming a unicorn at YC are literally twice as high if you're a YC company and you decide to stay in the Bay Area. So it jumps from 5% to 10% chance that you'll become a unicorn. That's YC, that companies that happen to be in YC. But if you look at just your choice of location, Gabriel Jorison here, who is VC at Lobster Capital on LinkedIn, followed up this tweet and said, there have been 2 venture-backed outcomes greater than 10 billion in New York since the 90s, Datadog and MongoDB. But during that time, there have been 3 trillion dollar, greater than $1 trillion outcomes in the Bay Area, NVIDIA, Google, and Meta, and an uncountable number of $10 billion plus outcomes. And so what he's saying is even being in New York is a significant headwind to having a massive outcome with your venture-backed startup. And then Gary, his original point was being in YC, which is kind of even a more concentrated part of Silicon Valley, doubles your chances again. And the point here being, the point they're making and they've called out is who you surround yourself by and where you are has a massive impact on your chances for success. Success here being defined as, $1 billion and $1 trillion outcomes.
I would say that is indeed success.
That is indeed. Well, I mean, I add that caveat because, Yaniv, you and I in the comments section of our LinkedIn posts will often have very proud people who are not from or in Silicon Valley, never experienced it, declaring that Silicon Valley's definitions of success are not the only definitions of success, and that somehow lifestyle and safety and political stability and family and all these other things are just as important to the success of one's life. And those things are true. It just depends on what you're prioritizing for. And I would argue this show and Silicon Valley are really about prioritizing for the exit and the value creation at scale.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And look, it's hard to argue with the data. I mean, especially in terms of those massive outlier outcomes, right? They tend to happen in Silicon Valley. The only point I would make, or the only little extra bit of context I'd give there, is that some of those outcomes actually were companies that were founded outside of Silicon Valley and then moved there, including, interestingly, Y Combinator itself, which actually started off in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And so did Meta, right? Facebook came out of Harvard and was encouraged by his investors, Mark Zuckerberg, to move to Silicon Valley. So I think, there's always that little bit of correlation causation thing, which is once you reach a certain scale, you kind of need to move to Silicon Valley, or there are various forces that push you there. But that is because it's an unparalleled place to grow your startup. And, I have said, and, as someone who's never lived full-time in Silicon Valley, choosing not to live there if you want to build the best career, the best startup in tech, it is a lifestyle choice. And as you say, Chris, it's a lifestyle choice that I've made. It's a lifestyle choice you've made a lot of the time. I know you're living there at the moment. It is completely valid to make those choices. You can also build incredible startups anywhere in the world. It's just a bit harder. And, one thing we're trying to do with this podcast is make it slightly less harder, if you see what I mean. But it will still be harder. And I don't really see much point with arguing against that.
Yeah, I would say that the best argument against the Silicon Valley success theory is that founders can walk away with a life-changing amount of money with a bootstrapped or subscale exit. If you exit for 10, 20, 30, 50, $100 million from a company you mostly own or partly own outside of Silicon Valley, and you don't become a unicorn or a $1 trillion company, that's still a life-changing amount of money for you personally, potentially. The question you have to ask yourself is your goal a life-changing amount of money, or is it changing the lives of others? Is it about building a legacy, making a dent in the universe, about collecting what some people call fuck-off money, money that allows you to move from being comfortable to being a capital allocator? And I think this is a question that only you as an individual can answer for yourself. Again, for large parts of my life, my focus has actually not been on money. It's been on making a dent in the universe and building something that outlives me and scaling and improving the world. And so that's a very different goal. Okay, the next and final thing we wanted to talk about was Snap's new spectacles. These are their AR glasses powered by the all-new Snap OS. I'm not seeing these things get a lot of press, actually, which is interesting. I'm sure they've gotten some coverage, but I'm not seeing a lot of buzz or excitement. Let me describe these to you a little bit. Snap had these original spectacles with glasses, with cameras, and I would say that the Meta Ray-Ban glasses are really drafting behind the Snapchat spectacles, the first generation of these. And they had cameras built in. You could take some photos and videos and feed it straight to Snapchat and post it on Snapchat. They sort of kind of didn't go anywhere. Meta then came out with the Ray-Ban Meta Stories, or whatever the hell the brand is. I think those have been much, much more successful. They have some AI built into them now. They're plugged straight into Facebook, which is, very popular, very mainstream. But now Snap has added again with, I would say, like version 3 of these things, actually, because I think they released 2 versions of the camera ones. And these are like big, fat, rimmed science experiments. You look like a giant nerd wearing them. But, who knows? It could be an ironic fashion statement. But these things are like legit AR. They have, waveguides and optics and what have you, where they can actually track your fingers. You can gesture at things. There is a layer of screen. It's a limited viewport within the screen, within the glass. And there are apps, like there are legit AR apps, and you can place in the world, and it's tracking your head, it's tracking your hands, it's tracking the objects you place in the world. And I'm surprised, this is not getting more buzz, and maybe it's because it's the aesthetics and because of Snap's history as being really a one-trick pony. But I think it's actually a meaningful step forward in AR glasses, and I can't wait to see how this category evolves.
I think there's a very obvious reason why they're not getting much buzz, and that is because the glasses wearable category has been such a massive disappointment in tech for more than a decade. You have to go back to Google Glass, and for those who are too young to remember, Google Glass was Google's first attempt at kind of AR glasses, and it was released or announced with a huge amount of hype. And it was hype that didn't go away for a couple of years. This was sponsored by Sergey Brin, one of the founders of Google. They put a lot of money into it. They put a lot of hype into it. They built partnerships. They talked it up, and it was a big thump. And then 10 years in the wilderness, and then the Apple Vision Pro came out. And from a consumer point of view, another big thump. And in between, there were all of these things. Like you said, this is Snap's third go of it. There was, the Magic Leap glasses, all of these things. And none of them have had any real user adoption, haven't been useful in the real world. So there is just a real fatigue around the category. Now, that's answering your question directly. But I don't think that just because it's been a very disappointing category for quite a long time means that it will not have its day. All of these things, it's some combination of finding the right use case, waiting for the technology to meet that use case, and then something interesting happens. And, I'd say the closest comparison I would make is actually to smart watches, which I think were a silly gimmick for a long time. And the Apple Watch came out, and that was also a silly gimmick for a long time. And people might forget this now that Apple Watch is this ubiquitous thing. For the first few iterations, it was more of a fashion statement. They weren't very useful. They were heavy. They sucked. People were saying that it's not going anywhere. And then suddenly, but not spectacularly, it became something that was just an everyday object that most people who were part of the Apple ecosystem wanted to have an Apple Watch as well. And I guess you see this convergence now. You mentioned the Ray-Ban glasses. We've now mentioned these Snap spectacles, the Apple Vision Pro. I feel these are 3 points along the kind of the Pareto front of what is possible with today's technology, a trade-off between weight and battery life on the one hand and capability on the other. I'd say the Snap spectacles look like they sit smack bang in the middle of the two. We're probably a couple of years off. All of these things getting to a point where consumers are like, oh, damn, now I just want these things. And again, it may not be this like you wake up one day and everyone's really excited about it. It's more like in 5 years' time, we'll look back and we'll be like, remember when people's glasses just didn't do anything?
Yep.
And that's what's going to happen.
You mentioned the Apple Watch being useless at the beginning. You have to realize it goes way back before that, right? There was the Casio calculator watch, right?
Hey, that thing, do not diss the Casio calculator watch, my friend. You will have half of our listeners sending us hate mail.
Look, it was for the nerds, right? It did not go anywhere. It was silly and clunky, and it was, fashionably a disaster. And people wear them ironically now, right? I just saw someone on stage at the All In Summit wearing one as I think an ironic nod. That's how long sometimes it takes for these categories to mature. And this is, back in the day when we weren't having, exponentials on top of exponentials on top of exponentials. And so the rate of change and maturity of these technologies is just mind-boggling now. And frankly, I never imagined we would have spectacles of this type this year. Actually, spectacles that are kind of nerdy and fat, but they're actually overlaying content on the real world and you can buy them as a consumer. Like, holy shit, that is a huge leap forward. I agree with you. In a couple of years, let's call it 5 at the outside, there will be Ray-Ban, Meta, Stories, form factors with overlays on the glass. And I also agree with you that the worst case scenario for this category, like the absolute worst case scenario, is if you need to wear glasses, you're in an industrialized country with just a little bit of money, they're going to be smart glasses. They're going to have something in them.
Why would they not be?
They're going to have a speaker. They're going to have a mic. They're going to have some access to AI. They're probably, 50-50 going to have a camera. They're probably 80-20, 60-40 going to have some kind of, overlay on the glass over the next, whatever, let's call it 10 years. This is inevitable. It's like gravity, right? The only question is, will it go beyond that? And how far will it go beyond that? Will everybody be wearing some version of these glasses to augment their day? And I think for my money, I sure as hell am going to, even though I don't need to wear these as I walk around, I will probably start. And so, yeah, it's a very exciting future. As I've said on the show many times, I think it's one of the main form factors for AI, along with earbuds. That's going to be the way you interact with your AI all day.
Can I just add a slight aside onto this as well? I wanted to talk about Snap as a company because I would actually kind of commend them for staying the course on this. Snap is another company whose share price has not been covered in glory. They since their IPO in 2017, they're down 64%, right? So not fabulous. But this is a well-managed company. And by the way, being down 64% and being down 96.5%, those are different worlds. That's a different order of magnitude. Snap is a company that is a big player in a world full of gigantic players, right? And so they have actually stuck to their knitting. They know what they're about. They still have massive usage among their demographic. That it's easy to go under the radar because the sort of people who invest in companies are not the demographic that uses Snap. But it is just as popular as ever among teenagers in developed countries. And they're executing really well. They know exactly where the glasses fit into their strategy. And they're going to keep trying till they get it right. I actually think this is really good discipline.
So I want to disagree with you a little bit. I think, I've mentioned this on the show before. This actually connects to our Silicon Valley topic from earlier. My very prejudiced perspective on the world is New York's great for fashion and finance. LA is great for media and content, and SF is great for platforms and deep tech. Snap, for me, is a quintessential LA company. They can't find their platform strategy and their deep tech strategy with 2 hands and a flashlight. MySpace before them is a great example. They have it. They've got lots of users. They got lots of brand affinity. People love what they love about it. but they can't seem to become a real tech and engineering company. And there was actually just a talk by Mark Zuckerberg on the Acquired podcast live on stage here at the Chase Center. And he was talking about, like, we are an engineering company. This is what people don't understand. We're not the Facebook social network company. And I just don't see LA companies in general, and Snap specifically, building real platforms, real suites, real demand aggregation, and spreading it out across a platform of bets or a suite of bets. And they're kind of been disrupted with their main behavior by TikTok. And so I think there's a lot more juice to squeeze out of a Snap, and I don't think it's being squeezed well. That's my perspective on it.
Okay, let me accept your premise, but then still maybe disagree with your conclusion as poorly run. You've said that they're a quintessential LA company. Well, sometimes you just got to lean into your strengths, Chris. Like, yes, if they'd been an SF company, maybe they could have been 10 times, 20 times bigger, but they're an LA company. They are great at content. They still remain great at content. And they are pursuing a strategy that makes it possible for more and more of their type of content to be created on their network, right? And that's why they have the drone, they have the glasses. So I think what they have is a strategy that they're executing against. And it's not a strategy that will make them $1 trillion company, but it is a strategy that they're executing with discipline.
I don't have Snap spectacles from the first gen, the second gen, and I'm probably not going to get the third gen.
Dude, you're old. You're old.
I don't have their
You're like
drone.
nearly as old as me.
My point is that
you are not the target audience.
There are too big a gap between each one. They're not iterating consistently. There doesn't seem to be I, for one, and I bet no other developer will, build on the Snap OS platform. It's just not going to happen. They're not serious as a platform vendor. And so, yes, they're playing to their strengths. They're a great media company. They're not a tech company in my mind. I'm sure it's a very unpopular opinion, but listen, breaking news as we've been recording before we run out of time, Yaniv. OpenAI and Sam Altman have announced that advanced voice is rolling out to all Plus and team users on ChatGPT over the course of the week. And the tweet from OpenAI says, it can say, sorry, I'm late in 50 languages. And so they're acknowledging that it's really late. But this advanced mode, if you don't remember, was the one with the, basically Scarlett Johansson's voice that was the unauthorized Scarlett Johansson voice. It is incredible. You can interrupt it. It can laugh and joke along with you. It has a smile in its voice. It can talk faster, slower, more dramatically. It can whisper. I mean, this thing sounds goddamn amazing. I can't wait to get it. And it's just been announced as we are recording on September 24th, 11:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, that it is rolling out this week. So I'm excited to play with it.
I can't wait. Even on Android?
Maybe on Android too. No guarantees.
We'll see. All right, Chris, it's been fun to get back into the saddle with you, mate.
All right, Yaniv, how can people find you on the internet?
Okay, so I'm mostly on LinkedIn, trying to make it a less boring place, although sometimes with the help of AI, don't tell anyone. Otherwise, I'm on my sabbatical, so, busy traveling around Europe, and I'll be back at the end of the year. All right, Chris, how about you?
Yeah, you can find me on all the social media at Chris Saad. You can also find me on my website, chrissaad.com and chrissaad.com/newsletter. We'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Today's episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by Vanta. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. Over 7,000 global companies already use Vanta. Why don't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.